Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow. Two cats ready to go. One's black, one's white. Phoebe and Snow, they know what's right. They hope that their future together is bright. They love to play. They play together every single day, wherever they go. The bond they have will not let go. Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe and Snow. My name is Cale Burnett, and welcome to the ninth episode of Phoebe and Snow called Rainy Day. And this story is going to be rather sad. Maybe sweet, but who knows. Anyway, but basically, this is one of the sad episodes, so you might need a little bit of a... You might need to wipe your tears a little bit. Anyway, but basically, this episode, let's get on with the episode. Basically, we start off in Catville, and basically, it is not a normal day. There are clouds everywhere. Anyway, basically, Phoebe and Snow woke up, and all the Catvillers woke up to an incredibly cloudy morning, a very dark cloudy morning. It was now October at this point, and basically, there had to be some October rain. And basically, this was pretty useful because Catville had not been having any rain for the last couple of weeks. Anyway, so basically, this was a really well-needed rain chance. So basically, Phoebe woke up. Well, looks like today's gonna be a great day, and then she paused mid-sentence. She could see that it was going to storm in Catville. Maybe this might not be a good day after all, but I guess it will be. Phoebe was maybe not the best with rainy days, but she understood that there needed to be some rain in Catville at this point, since they hadn't been having much luck with any rain at this point. Anyway, so basically, Phoebe woke up, and at that point, she decided to go to the bathroom and go downstairs. But then, she was spotted until her parents saw that the news was playing. And this news was not primarily good news. To experience a flood warning. Ooh, a flood warning. This can't be good, said Phoebe to herself. Now, Catville did have some floods at some point, but they were never really much too severe. In fact, Catville wasn't really known for getting extreme drought. So basically, the weather always seemed calm, except for a few times in which the weather got extremely tense, and this nearly freaked out the other Catvillers in the area. So basically, Phoebe was awoken to a news report saying this. Hello, welcome to Catville More News. I'm Jeff. I'm Jeff. What's the latest? Well, it appears that it's going to be a really stormy day today, since we have a flash flood warning for Catville, and practically throughout all of Catville. And it may not be very good. So I highly recommend you stay indoors. But yeah, and I'll bring it back to you, Jeff. And then Jeff continued to talk about the news. Phoebe said, "What's going on?" And Margaret and Jeff confronted Phoebe. Margaret said, "Honey, there's going to be a very bad storm today, and we want you to be safe." "I know," said Jeff. "We want you to be safe." And making you won't get washed away, Jeff gave a very unfun rule. He always liked to joke, but sometimes his joking could be taken as too grim for others to understand. Basically, at that point, Phoebe decided to brush off and thought that it was actually going to be a really good day overall, but who knows what was left to come. Basically, at that point, Phoebe got up and decided to make herself some breakfast. She poured herself in some K Crunch, which makes its first appearance since the very first episode, Phoebe Meets Snow, so it's a long time no see. As well, instead of a green bowl like the first episode, Phoebe pours it into a purple bowl. Anyway, so Phoebe was eating Cat Crunch, like the Cat Crunch, something along those lines. So she was eating that until she heard a bang. What was that? Ooh, looks like a thunder. A lightning strike. That can't be good, said Phoebe. Phoebe always feared thunder. I mean, she obviously knew that she would not die from herself. I mean, she could not get struck with lightning. Maybe because she was a black cat, but who knows? Anyway, but basically, at that point, Phoebe was continuing to eat breakfast, but let's check on how the other cats are feeling at this time. So basically, let's go over a Snow side. Snow was really worried about today. Like, she heard about the big storm that was happening today. So she wanted to make sure that everyone was doing great. And Snow was a bit of a rescuer. She decided to spend the day giving out aids to people and making sure that they would stay safe from the horrible storms like the one that they were about to face right now. Anyway, so basically Snow woke up and instantly knew something was wrong. Basically, noticed that, of course, like Phoebe, the clouds were very dark, and it seemed like it was gonna be a very stormy day, and it kinda was expected to be. In fact, Snow had overheard the news as she was sleeping a little bit. So Snow overheard that, and basically, she could already point out what was wrong. Now, for Edward, though, he woke up and already predicted, using his Predicto-Mag machine, which was a very high-interface machine that allowed him to predict what would happen. And this made Edward always prepared. Because of this super great device, he could never actually end the disaster because of how brilliant and how great the invention was. So because of that, Edward did not face any trouble at all. Anyway, basically, he typed in what was going to happen today. Anyway, and Edward already knew it from the top of his head. Basically, it already read out that there was going to be an extreme flood warning for Catville. And practically, this would probably even be so severe that it would even cause power outages, and maybe even take Catville down. But who knows what that could do. Basically, Edward was a little bit concerned, but he was ultimately prepared. Because of his Predicto-Mag machine, of course, he was always prepared, and it told him the right things that he needed to do. His Predicto-Mag was a very useful tool. It told him what he should be eating, it told him where he needed to go at what times. Edward was a very crafty and profoundly innovative and prolific creator and innovator, and inventor too. He was practically like a new version of Flint Lockwood from the Guy with a Chance of Meatball series, and he's probably my favorite character of all from the Guy with a Chance of Meatball. from the Clive Chance and Meatball films. I personally like him as my favorite Phoebe character ever. Anyway, but basically, enough about Flintlock. But basically, Edward was an incredibly great and skilled inventor. And of course, Edward was into making his projects and his inventions stand out. He was practically like anything else, and had a style that was unlike many of the other kids for the science fairs at Catville Elementary School. Anyway, but basically Edward knew what was gonna happen, and he decided to spend some time to confront Phoebe and Snow to make sure that they will all stay prepared for the big storm. Now on Brittany's side, Brittany did not seem to care nonetheless. She thought it was gonna be some ordinary storm, but she started to feel a heavy emotion when the storm was about to be classified as a Type 3. And Type 3 was the most severe. Type 3 was the most severe classification of storms ever in Catville. Class 1 meant it was not a strong storm, it was a slight storm. 2 meant moderate, and 3 meant really high, or high. There was no such thing as 4, but if there was a 4, I would call it profound. So it could be 4. So basically, Brittany was very concerned overall today. Now we may have explored in previous episodes that Brittany could be a jerk, but I feel like now that we're in episode 9, she practically has changed quite a bit yet. And she'll get her own and we're gonna anyway, never mind, I won't go into that. That will leak in a future season for a future episode. Anyway, but basically, Brittany ultimately decided to wear some of her most protective clothes ever. She chose the clothes that she rarely wore, and only clothes she wore for very stormy days. This was basically her beautiful clothes that she could not ever get wet, because if one drop of rain or one smudge went on her clothes, it would be catastrophic, and it would make it irreversibly hard and irreversible and impossible to get the stains off. Such fragmented and fragile clothes that Brittany could not let anyone touch them, and she tried her best not to stain them. At that point, let's jump back to Phoebe's side. So basically, Phoebe was cleaning up her dishes and decided to head back upstairs. She took a deep breath and was starting to feel very worried. Don't worry, I think this is gonna be very good. So she only decided to have a little meeting with her little toys. She said to her toys, I don't know about you, but if I make it out there alive, it would be a blessing unto God. Thank you. And she wiped a tear from her face. Sure, Phoebe was of course being quite a bit dramatic, but who can blame her? I mean, this was gonna be a very big storm in Catville. And if it was gonna be a big storm in Catville, there had to be chances of survival. Otherwise, we would not make it. Anyway, but basically, let's go back to Snow's side. So at this point, we're now basically doing 4 storylines and 4 perspectives all at once. So we've talked about Phoebe. Phoebe's the first, Snow is the second, Edward the third, and Brittany the fourth. So let's go back to Snow's side. On Snow's side, she was practically, she decided to eat some breakfast. And for breakfast, she had cake crunch, but this time, chocolate cake crunch. Phoebe normally liked to eat the fruity ones, but Snowy eat the chocolate ones. Now, in Catville, cats can eat normal human foods. So even if a Catviller were to eat chocolate, they would not die. Unlike a real-life cat, in which if a cat ate chocolate in real life, they would die almost instantly. Because that food and those substances are very harmful to cats. And things like cigarettes, like if you ever want to get your cat to smoking, well, don't, because it's a very harmful process. And because of that, cats can ultimately die because of cigarettes. So it's a good idea not to make cats have cigarettes or anything else, because then this could really deteriorate their health. Anyway, enough about that. But basically, Snow decided to eat Pack Crunch, and after she finished, she ultimately decided to clean up her dishes and go to her room to calm down for a bit. Snow is like a yoga person, and she likes meditation. Now, this was a very rare thing, but she did thought. She did think that this was a very necessary thing to do, especially since a very giant storm was gonna hit Catville, and so she needed a way to stay prepared for the storm. As for Edward, going back to Edward's side, he basically went to the kitchen and he had some orange flakes. He liked orange a lot because that was his skin color. Okay, that's a little bit racist, but he liked orange because it tasted really good. And he grew up in an orange culture because he was an orange cat. Anyway, but basically, Edward was eating some orange flakes, and he was eating orange flakes, and basically, that's where his parents confront him. And this is also the first time that we get to hear from Edward's parents. So basically, Edward has a mom named Eleanor, and basically, Edward had a dad named Eugene. Well, look at our little boy, preparing for school. Well, it's a shame that it's really raining outside. I know, I feel worried, my dear, said Eleanor. Hey, Edward, I bet you're gonna be very safe because of your inventions. You're gonna save us all. I think I know it, said Edward. And basically, they continued to eat breakfast, and they would comfort around them. And as for Snow, her parents also confronted her, making sure that, and saying the exact same things that other parents had said to their children, making sure that they would be safe for the storm, and that they would not be harmed no matter what. So basically, at that point, Snow was confronted by Alice and Daniel, and basically they confronted her and calmed her down, and then they gave her a hug. As for Brittany, this is where we get to introduce Brittany's parents. Basically, Brittany has a mom named called Brenda, and Brittany has a father named Bob. Yeah, Bob. Think of like Bob Dylan, but not really. He's not really Bob Dylan. Anyway, but basically, Brenda and Bob confronted Brittany and they said to her, "Well, I hope you remember to stay beautiful as always." I know. I hope that. And basically, Bob was offering the same words like Brenda was. And they ultimately hugged each other. And now it was time for all the cats to head out. Basically, the first one was Phoebe. Phoebe walked downstairs. And basically, that's where she was confronted by her parents once again. And this time they were not going to school. Well, they weren't going to scold her, but basically they were going to confront her once again and comfort her. So basically, Phoebe walked up and said, "I feel scared right now." "Don't worry," said Mark. "We'll be here for your side." "Yeah, don't worry, Phoebe. We'll be there," said Jeff. So basically, Phoebe, Margaret, and Jeff all got around each other and hugged each other, and they comforted each other. They held on for quite a long time. Not insanely long, but just enough for it to be considered a very touching moment. I like to do hugs a lot because I want people to have these characters touch their hearts. And that's my key to making these Phoebe and Snow episodes, to be as touching as possible and to inspire and embrace positivity. That was ultimately my big mission for creating Phoebe and Snow. Anyway, Snow walked downstairs and Snow walked downstairs and she went up to the door. And at that point, Alice and Dan comforted her. "Well, I guess this is it. We'll get to see you. Goodbye." Anyway, but basically, at that point, Alice and Daniel confronted, basically hugged Snow for a long time. And they did just like Phoebe. And basically, they did because all the Catvillers did. Because they were born with very kind hearts. And their hearts could not really be broken, no matter what. Whether a cat was aggressive or not, they still had goodness inside of them. Unlike pure... Anyway, but basically, in Catville, there were very few aggressive people out there. And basically, when the world felt scary to some cats, they ultimately moved on and needed a place to escape. And so they went to their homes, and they found peace and quiet in their own homes. And the Catvillers' homes were the only place that they could not be harmed. So basically, if someone tried to trespass into another one's home, they could practically not get away with it and ultimately end up in jail. In fact, very few cattle ended up in jail. It was modestly small because of the good nature of heart, because the good nature of the hearts of all the Catvillers. Now for Edward's side, Edward hugged his parents, Eugene and Eleanor, and they whispered to each other good words about each other, and saying little prayers to the Lord Jesus Christ to make sure that they would stay safe and that the storm will ultimately still. Anyway. And then finally for Brittany, this is where the scene touches us the most, because we have mostly seen Brittany as a bad influence on Phoebe, but overall, she is a very poignant character. She represents what's sometimes broken in our lives. She sometimes sees an empty street, and she sometimes walks on the boulevard of broken dreams where the city sleeps, and sometimes she's the only one. I walk a lonely road, the only one I've ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me, and I walk alone. Do do, do do, do do, do do do. I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps, and I'm the only one, and I walk alone. Do do, do do. I walk alone, I walk alone. Do do, do do. I walk alone, I walk alone. I thought that'd be a good musical number. Anyway, so basically, Brittany, Brenda, and Bob tug each other, and they were somewhat crying, because of course this is a very emotional episode. It's a sad one, in fact. I made this episode so that way the audience could cry. Anyway, but basically, at that point, Brenda, Bob, and Brittany stopped hugging, and it was time for the Catvillers to go. Do 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 do. Got holes in my jeans, putting these around. Got holes in your jeans and putting these around. You take forever, baby. Baby, you don't shine like you take forever like a tattoo. The world that comes out without you. When the clouds come out rain, and the ocean drains, and the church ain't preaching Sunday, that's when I'm moving on and getting gone. Till I put you in the ground, amen. That's when I'm leaving you. That's when I'm leaving you. That's when I'm leaving you. Ooh. That's when I'm leaving you. Ooh. That's when I'm leaving you. Do. Sorry, I thought that'd be another good musical number. Anyway, that's 2 musical numbers. Anyway, this is so far the episode with most musical numbers so far. Anyway, but basically, let's go back to the poignant nature and the sad-hearted nature of this episode. Anyway, I feel like, we've spent almost half an hour talking about the beginning. Anyway, but basically, I'll finally get to the chase. So basically, Phoebe walked out the door and closed it. Snow walked out the door and closed it. Edward walked out the door and closed it. And finally, Brittany walked out the door and closed it. But now on top of that, all the other Catvillers were closing the doors behind them. The closings of the door were with ones. It was not loud, but very jarring. Very dark. And let's see where the story picks up next. Soon after, Phoebe, Snow, Edward, and Brittany, and all the other children of Catville were walking to the bus stops. Some were walking slow, some were walking fast, and some at their normal pace. Regardless of their speed, they were all having worry about something bad was gonna happen. And of course, I would feel the exact same way too, if a flood were to come. In fact, In fact, in my hometown, Charlottesville, Virginia, I don't think we've had floods, now that I remember. I think we have, but I'm thinking more like hurricanes. So basically, in 1969, we had like this big hurricane. I don't know much about it, but I don't know. There have been instances where hurricanes have actually scared me to death. Like, remember Hurricane Dorian from 2019? Oh, really scary. So, I don't know what I was doing. So basically, I decided to have the Bible comfort me. And I was reading, like, 2nd John. I don't think there's anything that's relatable about it to the flood, but for example, I wanted to read a bit of the Bible, and for some reason, I ended up reading 2nd John, and read all 13 verses of a short epistle of John. And of course, John was a writer, and basically, his name appears in 4 of the 66 books of the Bible. There's the Gospel according to St. John, 1st John, 2nd John, and 3rd John. So practically, his own standalone book, and practically a trilogy of epistles. Anyway. But basically, I read the Bible and it comforted me a lot. And sometimes when I feel myself getting dark thoughts, I go to that book, and it really helps me out a lot. Buy a boy a baseball, getting outside, buy a boy a baseball, getting outside, get his hands dirty, take a little time, give a boy a Bible, teach him how to pray, thank the good Lord at the end of the day. Burly, teach him how to work, spend his own money, show him what it's worth. He's got he'll fall, pick himself up, yes sir, it's gonna be a man, one of these days he can. So buy a boy baseball, whoa, buy a boy baseball, whoa, buy a boy baseball. That's my first song in this episode. Anyway, I think I need to pick up a pace moving, because we've been talking forever really. Anyway, but basically, at that point, all the Catvillers got to the stop sign. Now, there was not one stop sign, there was multiple of them, since the children of Catville they overall did not live close together. They mostly lived on one of the 4 cat streets. 1st Cat Street, 2nd Cat Street, 3rd Cat Street, and 4th Cat Street. These are the streets that we've talked about numerous times, and especially we talked about it in the Phoebe and Snow movie in our last episode. Anyway, but basically, the children of Catville got to the edges. Basically, at that point, there was not one single bus that picked up all the Catvillers' children. Instead, it was multiple buses. So, with the multiple buses, Phoebe and Snow got on bus. They got on bus 33. And the reason why I chose that number was because bus 33 was the bus that I took when I was in 7th grade. And I liked bus 3 a lot. I think it's arguably one of my best years ever. I got all A's, yeah, it was a pretty good nostalgic year when I started to work more on my anime theories, like doing a bit of Phoebe Snow, but most on another work called Work Cats. And as well, I think it was a very good time. I went to middle school, so
I, I still call it, quote, one of my favorite schools ever to go to, end quote. Turns out they were all very supportive of me. Miss Johnson, the principal at the time, was very supportive of me. She would always sometimes, you know, be helpful to me. Sure. Anyway, but sometimes I face moments of awkwardness. Here's one. So basically, my me, Dad, and my sister named Mars Kate at the time, before it changed to Mars. Anyway, but basically, we were all going down to like some event, and basically, Miss Johnson said, "Can I sit next to you?" And I said yes. But turns out it may have been a big regret because I felt awkward the entire time. Like, oh geez, this grown woman is sitting next to me. Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, anyway, regardless of what I said. But basically, that was some of my favorite moments in 7th grade. And I also I'll share one last story before I continue. So basically, a second 7th grade story was when basically one of my classes was this not a computer design class. It was like an engineering class, like a STEM class. So I did that, and I made a calculator, like a bathroom pass for Miss Raz. So I made the calculator, and she loved it. And she said, quote, "I'll keep up here, making sure that nobody pees on it." Classic. Of course, it's my creation, so you better not smudge it. Yeah, if you smudge it, you may get a belt. Okay, I'm just kidding. Anyway, but basically, let's continue the story. So basically, at that point, the children of Catville had arrived to their school. Some went to Catville Elementary School, as there was more than one school. For example, there were multiple elementary schools in Catville, but none of them could beat the record and reputation of Catville Elementary School. As well, there were other elementary schools like Catson Elementary School, Catword Elementary School, Catby Elementary School, and there were also middle school, high schools, and preschools and nurseries too. Not to mention colleges. So there was a very diverse education world within Catville itself. People went to countless schools. People were from countless backgrounds. And that's what made Catville a very diverse place, regardless of their skin color, gender, or even simple things like what they loved. Everyone was always included in Catville. And sometimes I think of Catville as a place I like to go when I feel stressed. So let's say someone is being aggressive with me. Whenever I feel down, I think of Catville, and Catville has been a really good coping strategy for me whenever I feel down. For example, and the reason why I like to create things is because they not only help me with my creativity, but they also help me with my coping skills. And I sometimes want to share that with other people. So Catville isn't just for me. So Catville is not a gift from me and only for me. It's a gift from me to everyone in the world, practically all around all 8.24 billion humans, and to all the humans that ever lived. Regardless if they have lived or died, or are going for food, Catville is a place for everyone. And that's that. It basically serves as a very great tool and one of my favorite creations of the imagination, one of my favorite in which a human being could possibly create. And I always tell myself, there is no limitations to what you can create to you and I, and the human imagination is no limit. Those were two quotes that I wrote down, and two quotes I came up with for December 10th, 2022, the 1-year anniversary of which I did 3D animation, stuff like that. And now I've been doing it for almost 4 years, so I feel very accomplished at this point. Anyway, but basically, they were driving to the bus stop, and soon it was starting to rain, slightly at first. Then it started to intensify, and it started to come down a bit more harder. Every minute, it would get more intense and intense. Think of it as someone turning up the AC too much, like gradually, or imagine it like someone is, like, let's say you're trying to get rid of a stupid pimple. Like, I do this quite a bit too, but whenever there's like a pimple on my face, I try my best to literally get it off. And sometimes when I try to pinch it, it causes too much pain. So think of it like that. That's what I mean when the rain started to intensify in Catville. At that point, everyone was rather silent. They were talking like as if this was going to be the last days of their life. Soon, heavy rain hit, and the road started to become extremely slippy. The tires were about to skid off. At this point, it seemed like as though this would be the end of all the lives of little children. I know, I'm making this episode too dark. I think this would be a good Halloween episode. Maybe it is a Halloween episode. But this won't be released till November 2025. So happy post-Halloween. Anyway, basically, the tires were about to skid off. But thankfully, their bus driver, Mr. We'll call Gus, or Mr. Brakes, was a very skilled bus driver. He was a very old bus driver in his 60s and 70s. Well, either in his 60s or 70s, meaning he could be 60 to 79 years old. Basically, he had been a bus driver for Catville Elementary School for many decades, possibly ever. Actually, he's been a driver of Catville Elementary Schools since the school ever began. It opened in 1960. So basically, he was very skilled and knew exactly what to do. At this point, he started to go a bit slowly, and the buses soon announced to the schools that they were going to be quite a bit late due to the excessive and heavy rain. Anyway, but basically, everyone was in our panic. Some were even screaming like little girls, like little girls whenever they see a boy in their rooms, or whenever they see a giant snake, or they're getting eaten by a giant broccoli monster. I don't think giant broccoli monsters ever exist, but I like to think of them as a part of my imagination. I wonder what would happen if someone was literally being eaten by a giant broccoli monster. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna try and make this a story. I'm gonna try my best to get through with this story, and try not to make it too dark. But basically, at that point, the school buses were getting near, and the rain had started to die down a little bit. It was starting to go back to medium pace, meaning that it was not going to be basically, as far as they could tell, this was not going to be worse. Maybe not yet. Basically, the school buses soon approached their stops, and they soon went to the bus loop. Now, the cats were all prepared, and they all brought umbrellas. They were full packed, like army action figures. They brought in umbrellas. They brought in ponchos, raincoats, anything, practically any rain protection gear that they could do. And some were even smart enough to even bring windproof devices. I did not know about that until one of my scoutmasters, Mr. Davis from Troop 119, who basically was wearing a windproof device. I'm like, that's a strange thing, but I bet it'd be useful. But I can't covet from him because I have to come up with my own ways rather than what. This also is a good lesson into how we not covet, and this is also that's also the 10th commandment, Exodus 20. I want to say 20. I believe it's 2017. I believe that's what it is. Anyway, I think that's it. Anyway, but basically, yeah, we're also gonna be a bit more religious here because now we just have the 10th commandment. Anyway, but basically, actually, that doesn't have anything to the story. Anyway, but basically, the bus drivers soon parked their buses, and now it was finally time for them to get into the classrooms. As soon as the doors opened, everyone rushed in. However, they had to slow down because some were getting jammed like a traffic jam, or gridlocked, if you will. A more accurate term to describe such an action. So basically, at this point, everyone was rushing in, screaming for their lives. I mean, I guess it is appropriate because they are getting experienced by a very severe flash flood. So this episode's gonna get very intense. Anyway, but basically, they at that point, inside, rushed very quickly, and basically when they rushed very quickly, some of them even slipped, but thankfully no one really got hurt, because basically the Catvillers were very kind to each other, and whenever somebody slipped, they were always told, and they always did this. They always helped people up. So basically, some people did slip, but they were ultimately saved by school staff and other school students, making sure that they would be safe. So basically, Phoebe, Snow, Edward, and Brittany got into Miss Blank's room, safe and sound. As well, Miss Blank frantically closed the door, but of course, she did not slam the door as always, and basically because no one really slams doors in Catville. They just don't. It's kind of like, for them, Catvillers think it's not socially acceptable, but a bit degenerate, if you will, to slam a door. I mean, that's just how their ethics are, but they do forgive people if they do accidentally. So you could be accidental, and they will still forgive you because Catvillers are always forgiven no matter what. So basically, at that point, Miss Blank came in and said, "It's gonna be a really tough one, everyone, but basically we're gonna try our best to get through with this." So basically, at that point, Miss Blank decided to pause, because basically there was a special announcement from Miss Goldberg, the school principal, that gave Phoebe the award 7 episodes earlier. I know, going back to episode 2, good times. But basically, Miss Goldsberg came on the radio, and all the teachers and all the students pay attention to her, because this was a very important thing that was going to happen. "Hello," she said. I'm telling you, I'm saying to inform you that basically we want to make sure that our students and school staff are safe. And as a result, we will put the school in lockdown for a little bit. Instead, we will have teachers go on with their lessons as usual. Outside, the permission to go outside is not allowed, and anyone that goes outside will ultimately be punished and will face a bit of a detention. Which I know, that may sound a little bit unfair, but for God's sake, it's to ensure school safety. So basically, the school staff and the students did their best with each other to make sure that nobody would be left out, and to make sure that things would go as smooth as possible. So because of that, they did their best to defend themselves. Anyway, the school doors were ultimately locked, only the outside ones. Any late students would be escorted, and this was of course to ensure safety. Miss Goldsberg then finished her message by saying, "I love you all, and I hope that you have a great day. Sincerely, Miss Goldsberg." And the school broadcaster, or the aircom, which I believe what it's called, the one where they make all the school announcements and say things through like a microphone or a speaker. Basically, then the speaker hung up. And then it was time for Miss Blank and for all the other teachers, the school teachers of Catville Elementary School, as well as all the teachers for the other schools as well, to start their lessons. And also as well, these lockdown procedures were also happening. This ranged from everywhere, from the high schools to the middle schools, to the preschools, and even the college students. So they basically did their best to carry on and do as much as they could. Ultimately, Miss Blank decided to talk about science, and specifically environmental science. She always liked to structure her lecture and base off of things that were actually happening in her own world. And she chose environmental science because she ultimately heard about the storm and the flood. So basically, she basically went over the types of weather. They went over the water cycle and stuff like that. As they were doing that, suddenly a loud bang came, and thunder came. Ooh, that can't be good. Miss Blink sort of acted like a chicken. Anyway, but Miss Blink sort of acted like a chicken. Really like... Anyway, sorry about that. Anyway, but basically, I know Miss Blink does not act like the chicken, but he does like it is too. But basically, she chickened out and hid near her chair. She looked up and saw that it was just a piece that basically nothing had really happened. The lightning had just struck. That's close. That's close, said Miss Blink, and she kind of embarrassed herself in front of the other student. But I guess it's a valid one. So basically, the lessons continued on as always. However, as the lessons went on, they soon found themselves in more and more trouble. Soon it started raining heavy. So basically, So basically, they were all carrying on with their lessons. So after environmental science, or science if you will, came history, then reading, and then math for last. But before reading, as always, after 2 subjects, it was time for a break, or basically lunch at that point. So for lunch, basically, the Catvillers and the Catville Elementary School students were expected to stay in their classrooms, or they could go to the cafeteria no matter what, but they could not go outside. Nonetheless, it was actually starting to flood. At this point, about 2 inches of rainwater had flooded in Catville. Anyway, and so this made things feel very scary at this point. So it was kind of a bit scary at that point. So basically, at that point, students ate their lunches. Whether they ate it fast, slow, or even medium pace, they ultimately were feeling nervous, of course, because of all the flooding. Soon, by the time that they had finished their lunch, it had already flooded to 4 inches, and soon, some water started to leak in. Anyway, by the time that Miss Blank and the art teachers were about to start their first subject, with Miss Blank's subject being reading, basically, that's where the real trouble, that's where the climax kicks in. Basically, at that point, floodwater started to spew. Anyway, and basically, then it started to reach across. It started to reach all across. And basically, as soon as that, an alarm sounded. We have a national weather service, and this is good for Catville. We have a national weather service for Catville Elementary School. Please stay in your seats. Anyway, but basically, people were freaking out, and ultimately they sat on their desks. This is gross. Think about the water where that comes from. My children. Anyway, my children, some Catville parents started to say. Anyway, my parents, said some Catville children. They were all starting to freak out profoundly. Basically, this is where we may meet their fate. Goodbye, said Phoebe. Yeah, goodbye, said Snow. Goodbye, Edward, said Phoebe. Goodbye, Phoebe, said Edward. Brittany, I know you may have never really liked me, but I bless you for your heart. Stay safe. Bye-bye. I know, this is gonna be a very emotional, sad episode. I start to cry at this point. I thought you should know. Do. What's going on? Something just dawned on me. I have been home with some months. Been chasing socks on women, making some bad decisions. God knows I'm drinking too much. Yeah, I know you've been worrying about me. You've been losing sleep since 93. I thought you should know that all those prayers you thought you wasted on me must have found maybe their way on through. I thought you should know that I really like this girl down in Jefferson City, and she makes me whenever I want to. But I'm still proud of where I came from. Still your only dating son, busting rooted, so we gotta roll. I thought you should know. 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 I you to know. I want you to know. I know, that is musical. That is song number 5 in this episode. Anyway, basically, water was everywhere in the school. But basically, everyone was starting to pray to themselves. Well, you can't really pray in school, but sometimes they allowed that, and sometimes they had safe places in Catville Elementary School and throughout all of campus. So ultimately, it seemed like the end. But basically, soon after, Marker and Dress started worried. Oh no, it's very funny. We gotta save them. But how we get there? I know. We have the boat. The Batman boat. The Batman. Anyway, so basically, they could not use their car. Mark and Jeff could not use their car because their car would not be strong enough to carry them through the floodwaters. So the only logical thing to do was to use the boat. The Catman boat. Catman. I should have not said that, it's Catman. Anyway, but nonetheless, at that point, all the Catville parents start to come around boats, as well many adults came in as well. Soon after, 6 inches now with the flood. Basically, at that point, now Mark and Jeff and all the parents and all the adults were covered in not in rain, of course, but they were all protected, and their raincoats or their rain protection equipment was getting extremely soggy and getting extremely wet because of the intense rain. Soon after, everyone started to come across, and they basically allowed for rescue aid. Soon after, an emergency person or emergency responder came, and basically they opened the door of the school, and from there they helped kids out. They helped kids one by one. Soon they first grabbed Brittany. Brittany was escorted back to her parents, and she was safe. Edward was next, and he was safe with his parents. Basically, Snow got rescued, and she was brought back to her parents, and so she was safe. Lastly came Phoebe, and she was brought back, and ultimately she was safe. Soon, school decided to close down, and at that point, they all... Anyway, at that point, they all came to their house, and school was ultimately canceled for the rest of the day. Basically, at that point, school was officially canceled and was canceled the next day because they needed time to recover from the flood. Ultimately, all the Catvillers went back home, and they stayed safe. No one went outside. Margaret and Jeff returned the boat, and they returned their boat back to the garage. And basically, they put Phoebe in her room because she had actually been wiped out and had been unconscious due to the heavy rain. Then, and it seemed like towards the end, basically recreating the scene. Towards the end of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937, Phoebe was lying in our bed, very unconscious. Margaret had tears in her eyes. But basically, I know, this is a tragedy. But basically, Phoebe rested for a little bit. Marker just stayed there for hours. And ultimately, Phoebe was dead. And because Phoebe was back, she ultimately came and hugged her parents really tightly. This was, of course, a heart-touching scene. Anyway. But basically, at that point, this is where the story nears the end. At that point, the Phoebe, Snow, Edward, Brittany were all safe with their parents, and they hugged each other once and for all. And basically, after that moment, they went and had some dinner, and they stayed inside for the rest of the day. They slept overnight, and when the next day came, the flood was completely gone. It was a complete miracle. And the flood had died down, and the next day was extremely sunny for Catville, and a little bit hot, but not too hot, only in the 60s or 70s. Mostly around 60s, but no more than 75, but no more than 70. Anyway, but basically, at that point, the next day they went outside to school. The Catvillers went back to school, mostly the Catville children. So after they went back to school, they stayed there for the rest of the day, and they were all thanked. But Phoebe got the most thanks because she had only been rescued. She had been rescued by her own parents, and so her parents were awarded a special reward, and they were honored Good Samaritan Award. And so was the entire Furball family, the first Catville family ever to seem to get such an award, to get such an award because of this. And that's what made the Furball family stand out. And they were the first family with all the members to do that. Anyway, the evening and night came, and Catville was safe, and there was not much. And basically, the next few days, rain happened, but wasn't as severe as it was in the flood. And now that the flood was ultimately gone, Catville was ultimately safe, and they could sleep, rest, eat, and be peaceful, do their normal activities without being terrorized by extreme weather. And that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that whenever you in a time of trouble, or like a severe weather, or whether you're having a severe weather alert, or where experience something shocking like a weather tragedy, I want you to stay safe and think about those closest to you, and think about something like maybe Catville. Well, that's mostly for me, but I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Anyway, as always, I'm the sole creator of this episode, Cale Burnett. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Stay safe and stay tuned for the next episode. Next episode will be episode 10, and it may be a surprise since I don't know what the episode title is called. Anyway, but I hope you enjoyed this episode, and take care. Sincerely, Cale Burnett.